Because that's that.
Okay, good evening everyone. Thank you for coming. Thank you for joining the share. Tonight's share is going to be focused very much on our relationship with the land of Israel. The title is Majesty and Meaning, the Eternal Gift of the Land of Israel. You don't need me to tell you how important this is, how much we need a bit of traditional chizuk, which means to strengthen ourselves in our relationship and love for the land of Israel, for Israel itself. And the reason why it's appropriate to do it this week is because of all the parashiot in Torah. This is the one, I think, that is most centered on our relationship with the land of Israel. And that is because in Behar we have the mitzvot, so many of the mitzvot that surround the land of Israel, not all of them, but certainly the mitzvah of Shemitah, as we'll see, is so bound up, is so deeply connected with what it means to live and breathe in our land and the intention that the Torah has that we should have for our land. And then when we go into Bechukotai, what we find is the challenges that exist for us in our relationship with the land, because of course Bechukotai has the Torah, and it has that the sense of the potential for exile from the land, and therefore the whole history of the Jewish people is bound up in our relationship with the land. That's bound up with these two parashiot. And I've given you a quote here at the beginning because I think it's very meaningful. And if you look at it carefully, there's a very important message that Rav Soloveitchik is seeking to convey here. This was in an interview with the Ma'ariv newspaper that actually was published, I think, on Erev Rosh Hashanah 1975, 15th of September. And it covered a number of different areas. And one of the questions he was asked, Rav Soloveitchik was the Rav of Mizrahi. He was the senior rabbi of the Mizrahi movement. And he was asked, do you consider yourself a Zionist? And he said, if Zionism is just the technical concept belonging to some established body, then I'm not part of it, even though, he says, I'm a member of the Mizrahi. If Zionism represents love of the Jewish people and devotion to Eretz Yisrael as the land of our forefathers, then I'm certainly a Zionist. From my early childhood, my father studied with me the areas of Zira'im, that means the sowing the land, the different halachot that occur in reference to the land of Israel, the laws of Trumot and Masrot, the tithes, Matanot Aniyim, the gifts to the poor, Bikurim, the first fruits, the halachic concepts of the sanctity of the land, the impurity of the land of the Gentiles, the fact that preciousness of the land of Israel, the temporary or permanent sanctification of the land are deeply rooted in my heart. From a young age, I was educated towards the love of Eretz Yisrael as a land containing 10 levels of sanctification that is set out in the Mishnah at the beginning of Tractate Kalim. What Rav Soloveitchik is trying to tell us here is that as believing Jews, our relationship with the land, and when we refer to the concept of Zionism, it can't be just a reference to a political movement, a political ideology, which of course it is. But for us, it's so much more than that. It's our love and connection as the land of our ancestors and the land of our forefathers and our homeland and the place where we need to be to practice everything about what it means to live and breathe as a Jew. And that's what he's trying to convey here. And this, I think, is vital. It is vital in the circumstances we find ourselves in today. We feel so embattled on so many different fronts when it comes to our relationship with the land of Israel. And it's something which, not that we have any doubt about that, but because we are living in a world where we're not going to go into politics tonight. We're not going to go into, because you hear enough of it all day. You come here to escape from it. But therefore, what I'm saying is I think we especially need to strengthen that understanding. We need to strengthen our understanding of what it means to have the land and why it's so central to our belief as a people. And we're going to try and do that through the lens of this week's parsha. So, if you look at the very first few psukim, what you find is, before we come to the first source on the sheet, let's just read a few of the verses. Vaydaber Hashem al Moshe Behar Sinai Leimor. Hashem spoke to Moshe at Behar Sinai. So something pivotal is happening. Why? Because we have an introduction with a place. Hashem spoke to Moshe on Har Sinai. What has happened to the rest of it? We're at the end of Vayikra now. Why are we telling us, what is this reference now to Mount Sinai? We'll come back to that. Daber b'nei Yisrael, speak to the children of Israel, v'amartu aleim, and say to them, ki savo el haaretz, when you come into the land, asher ani nosein lochem v'shofsa haaretz shabos l'Hashem, and the land shall rest. That is what you have to do. There have to be a shmita, and this is a central part of this parsha, the rules around the sabbatical year, the 7th year. Sheish shonim tizra sodecha, 6 years you shall sow your field, v'sheish shonim tizmor karmecha, 6 years you shall prune your vineyard, v'osafto es t'vosa, and you shall gather in its produce. Uvashonah hashvius, and in the 7th year, Shabbos Shabboson Yel Haaretz Shabbos L'Hashem, it shall be a Sabbath for Hashem, the land shall rest. Sod Cholos Sizra V'Karmel Cholos Sizmo, you shall not sow your field, and you shall not prune your vineyard. This entire year when the land rests. Very, very simple, basic question. Asked Rabbi Yechezkel Weinfeld, who I've quoted before. He was the rabbi of the shul I davened in when we were living in Ramat Eshkol in Jerusalem. Very simple question. Why is it that the rule of Shemitah needs to be repeated twice? You have, when you come into the land shall rest. Shabbat Lashem, that's verse 2, right? Then it says, 6 years, rest the land. And then it says again, the 7th year, the land shall rest. With Shabbos, the obvious parallel, with Shabbat, it doesn't say that, right? It says 6 days you shall work, and the 7th day is Shabbat. That's logical. So the verse should start, the Torah should begin with, do this in the 6 years, and then the 7th year, it's the Shemitah year. Why does it start with that verse which says, when you come into the land, V'shavsa ha'aretz Shabbos Lashem, and the land shall rest for Hashem. And he says that the answer is as follows. The Jewish people have been living a miraculous existence in the desert, right? They're living on miracles. They are drinking miraculous water. They are eating miraculous food. The manna which comes from heaven. They are protected by the clouds of glory. They have no relationship with what it means and understanding what it means to live a normal existence. They can see Hashem in their life. But as they're about to enter the land of Israel, it is ki tavoyu el ha'aretz. When you come into the land, you're going to enter a land of reality. This is a field, and you're going to have to work the field. This is a land you're going to have to work and exist on and learn what it means to fight for that land, understand what it means to keep that land. It's going to be a long and complicated process, and therefore there's always a risk that the Jewish people may enter the land and believe that their existence in the land is entirely based on their efforts. Kochi va'otzem yodi. It is their effort. It is their only simply won by the strength of their own hands. And therefore, the Torah tells us, Hashem says, the first thing you need to know is, when you come into the land, Shavsa ha'aretz Shabbos Lashem, that your existence is going to be working towards every 7th year where the land rests for Hashem. And we'll come to the reasons for the Shemitah year soon in the shir, right? But it's a focus. It's saying you come into the land, think about the message of Shemitah. And afterwards I'll tell you the rules. Afterwards the Torah says, we'll set out the rules. And this is what you can do during the 6 years, and these are the rules of the 7th year. The first thing though is the message. The first thing is the message is, even though it's true that the 7th year only comes after 6 years, you need to remember that that message of what the 7th year represents, the spiritual relationship with the land, you need to know that from day one, as soon as you walk into the land. And that's why it's phrased in this way. Now, Rashi tells us, right, this is the second source on the sheet. Rashi tells us, and this is one of the most famous Rashis in the whole Torah, he asked the question that we started with, Ma inyan Shmita eitzel har Sinai? What does Shmita got to do with Mount Sinai? What is it about the sabbatical year? There's a reference to Mount Sinai. Doesn't seem to be particularly critical here. All mitzvot, all of the commandments were said at Sinai. So what is the unique status of this mitzvah? Shmita, he says. There's a rule, telling you a lesson. It's telling you that Shmita namru klalosel protosel v'diktukei misinai. Just as with Shemitah, all of the general principles and the details were all said at Mount Sinai. Av kulon namru klalosein v'diktukei misinai. So too, all of the other mitzvot, all of the details were said at Mount Sinai. And then he goes on to explain it. We don't have to see the rest necessarily inside. He brings a midrash that basically says that when it comes to Shemitah, we don't find this mitzvah repeated in Sefer Devarim, in the book of Deuteronomy. A lot of the mitzvot are repeated. We don't find this one repeated. And therefore, the rule that it's telling you here is that everything was said at Sinai. And as with all the mitzvot, so too they were also repeated later on before they entered the land as well. That it doesn't reply that everything was actually repeated there as well. That's what he says. So, on a simple level, what he's saying is that Shemitah is not mentioned because there's something unique about Shemitah, but simply because it's taken as an example. That just like this was stated at Mount Sinai in all its details and repeated later on before they entered the land, so too the rest. But obviously, there must be more to it. There must be something more to it. There must be some lesson that the message of Shemitah has, which is critical and fundamental to the whole Sinai experience. Otherwise, this mitzvah would not be chosen for that purpose. And what we're going to try and understand is what exactly is that lesson. What is the lesson that we are meant to learn from this process, from the whole the mitzvah itself? What can it teach us? By the way, you should know that it is an incredibly difficult thing to do, to keep the Shemitah, keep the sabbatical year. You know, we talk about it. The last Shemitah was 2022, where it ended in 2022, and we were in Israel in the summer, and we went to visit a Shemitah farm. a farm that was keeping Shemitah completely. And it was the most amazing experience. The farmer took us around with my family. The kids loved it. In one of these jeeps, Israeli jeeps, that was like bouncing around on the field, through the fields. He says, "I want to show you my fields." The fields, after a whole year of not working the land, was so broken. The mud, the earth, the dry after the months and months of no rain and not looking after the field. They can't look after the field at all. And it was an amazing experience. He said, he does this, do this. He says, "I do this because I believe. He has emunah that it will be fine," and he gets support, and there are organizations and staff organizations. But he said to us, "You think that on Som Gedalia, which is the first day you can actually put a hoe in the ground, right? The 3rd of Tishrei, obviously the 2 days before Yom Tov of the next year. Do you think I'm going to start planting today?" It takes a long time for the earth to recover, the land to recover. So it is an incredible sacrifice of the farmers to engage in this in the process of leaving the land fallow for a year. You had a question, sir?
Sorry. I find it difficult to understand. He's very worthy, this farmer, but you just said that he had to rely on other people's donations.
Well, in today's world, yeah.
So, oh, never mind. It's just too impractical. Carrot, please.
I mentioned that in terms of he's not able. How's he supposed to live? How's the farmer supposed to live?
Yeah. Precisely.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
And that is why, as we'll see, this feeds into and the way we need to. You needed that story to understand the challenges as to the reason for the mitzvah. So just hold on. Tell me if you've still got the question afterwards. All right. So the Ibn Ezra tells us. Let's first understand. Ibn Ezra tells us that there is a direct connection between Har Sinai, the experience on Mount Sinai, and this mitzvah. It's on Sills 3 at the bottom. He says, in a big debate that exists between him and the Ramban, right? This is well known. Ibn Ezra often has a different approach to Nachmanides. Ibn Ezra tells us, Ein muktam u'mu'ucha b'Torah, right? Ein muktam u'mu'ucha b'Torah. There is no order in the Torah necessarily. V'zuha parsha, and this parsha kodem vayikra, v'chol parsha shem acharov, and this parsha came before Vayikra, and all of the parshiyot that came afterwards, right? And all of the subsequent parshiyot. This actually was stated much, much earlier in the Torah. Ki adibur Behar Sinai, because the actual statement was on Mount Sinai. Va'ator now koras abris haksuva b'parshas ve'ela mishpatim, and now the covenant is made that was first stated in the parsha of Eila HaMishpatim. So if you go back to Mishpatim, right, at the end of the Parsha Mishpatim, which is of course the Parsha after the giving of the Torah, after Yitro you have Mishpatim. At the end of Mishpatim what you have is a description of a covenant that is made between Hashem and the Jewish people. That is the completion of the story of Mount Sinai, right? It's what it says. He made a covenant, and there was offerings that were made, and he sprinkled the blood. There's a whole account there of that. And that's what they say, Na'aseh v'nishma, let us do it. We will do and we will. So he says that this parsha of Shemitah is actually very closely connected to that covenant. It's part and parcel of that covenant. It's mentioned in this place to join together with the conditions that they need to enter the land. That on account of not keeping the moral code and the laws against immorality, they can be removed from the land. So too it says in Parshas Bechukotai. Let's look it up. Chapter 26, the second of the two parashas this week. Chapter 26, verse 34. It says, chapter 26, verse 34, in the middle of the Tochacha, which is the admonition, the difficult rebuke that is given, the consequences that can happen if the Jewish people do not follow what Hashem says. It says, Oz tirtze haaretz. Yep, chapter 26, verse 34. Oz tirtze haaretz es shavseseha. Then the land will appease its Sabbaths. Kol yemei hashamo. All the days it lies desolate. Vatem be'eretz oivechem. That you are in the land of your enemies. Oz tishbas haaretz v'tzos es shavsesel. And the land will rest because you're not going to be there because of the exile. And it will appease its Sabbaths. Kol yemei hashamo tishbos. All the years of its desolation it will rest. Eis Hashem lo shavsa. That which it did not rest when you were on the land. It's a very frightening statement, frightening curse. It's saying that they didn't keep the Shemitah, or they would not keep the Shemitah, or the warning is against not keeping the Shemitah, and if in the event that they do not keep the Shemitah, they can be exiled from the land. and then you have the 70 years of the Babylonian exile. Rashi is a long Rashi here, which we're not going to go through, where Rashi explains how the 70 years of the Babylonian exile corresponded to the 70 Shemitah years that they did not keep whilst they were in the land. So you see that the Shemitah is very closely bound up to the sense of a covenant. What is happening in Bechukotai is a covenant. That's what it is. The admonition is a covenant with the Jewish people. Hashem says you have to keep the Torah, and that's a necessary part and essential for your future. So the Ibn Ezra emphasizes for us that Shemitah is bound up with the very covenant that is made at Mount Sinai. The Ramban, Nachmanides, Ibn Ezra, of course, is Spain, Portugal, 12th century, I think. Ramban is 13th century. The Ramban, Nachmanides tells us as follows. He says, no, and this is, by the way, a consistent theme. Ramban always tries to understand the Torah in order. He doesn't like this idea of Ein Mukdam Umuchar B'Torah, the fact that you can have a parsha which is here, but really belongs there. You understand? Ibn Ezra is saying that really this bit, Behar Sinai, this whole parsha, really was stated earlier, together with the covenant, but it's written here to link to other passages in Vayikra, like the forbidden, the laws against forbidden relationships and things like this, right? Ramban says no. He says that this Behar Sinai is in the correct place, and when it says, end of this first line, Ki Perush Behar Sinai, when it's in source 4, yeah? When it says Behar Sinai, Mount Sinai, that means Ba'aloso Shom Lekabel Luchos Shios. That means when Moshe goes up Mount Sinai to get the second tablets. So he says, hold on a minute. There are two covenants, because there are two sets of tablets. There's a covenant that is made with the first set, and then there's a covenant made with the second set, right? So it says that at the beginning of the first 40 days, I'm going to try and summarize it because it's quite long. It says that there was this covenant made with the people, and there it says at the end of Parshat Mishpatim that he sprinkled the blood of the covenant with the people, etc. Then what happens is they sinned, right? The golden calf happens. And what does that mean? That, he says, it's as if that covenant has been annulled already. The covenant that was made has been broken because they worship the golden calf. Then Hashem says there's an opportunity for a new covenant, right? As it says in Shemot Lamadalat Pasuk Yud, Hine Onochi Kores Beris. We learn that on a fast day. Yeah, I will make a covenant. I'm making a covenant with you. And there you have some of the mitzvot are repeated or very similar to the laws that are stated in Mishpatim. There's a very close similarity between the section of Mishpatim just before the covenant is made, the first covenant, and the parsha of Ki Tisa, when the second tablets, right, are made. There's a very similar set of rules that are set out there. And therefore, he says that is the second covenant. But the second covenant, if you look at the third line in the second paragraph here, the second box at the bottom, V'rotza HaKadosh Baruch Hu lahachme aleihem. Hashem wanted to be stringent upon them, but bris hazos hashniya, with this second covenant, shetia aleihem ba'olos of the klolos, that there had to be these warnings and curses that occur, that can occur. And that is the admonition you find in the second of these two parashot. Shetia korishona, al kol ha-mitzvos, orishonos, v'al kol ha-mishpatim. That will be so that it becomes like the first one for all the commandments that are given. And therefore he says, if you look at, now let's look at it inside. It's worth seeing this inside because really the Ramban is taking us on a tour of the two books of the Torah. So it's really good, important knowledge. If you look at chapter 26, verse 46, so right at the end of the Torah, I know we're jumping a bit, but there's two long parashiyot, right? So it says, yes, that's right. Right at the end of the admonition, what does it say? Eila hachukim v'hamishpatim. These are the statutes and the mishpatim, the judgments, the laws. V'hatoros, and literally the laws, right? Rashi says that means two Torah, because one written and one oral. Asher nosan Hashem bein bnei Yisrael, that Hashem gave between himself and the Jewish people, Behar Sinai, on Mount Sinai, b'yad Moshe, in the hand of Moshe. And what does that mean? That means a reference back to all of those laws that are given in Parshas Mishpatim, when the Torah was given the first time, that this now is a re-emphasis, a renewal, a second covenant, you with me, with the extra warnings and admonitions, which makes sense because They've been through already the episode of the golden calf, right? So there's an increased sense of awareness, a need to be aware of the severity and the importance of what they're involved in. Okay? That's how it is. Then he says, next page, don't worry, Ramban carries on the next page, it's very long. He carries on, that's why I'm not doing all of it inside. He carries on and says, when it comes to the first covenant, the first time, it does mention Shemitah. You can look it up. In the book of Exodus, in Shemot, chapter 23, verse 11, in Parshas Mishpatim, it says, V'hashvias tishmetena unetashto. There's a brief reference to Shemitah. This is not the first time Shemitah is mentioned, but it's only brief. With the second covenant, here, we have it expanded on, right? So Shemitah is expanded on here. It's set out in great detail, all the rules and laws, etc., etc. And therefore, when it comes to at the first time when Moshe goes up the mountain, he's there for 40 days and 40 nights, and Hashem made the covenant, and then he comes down the mountain, and he commands them, and he breaks the tablets, and then he has to remake the new ones, right? And he has to make a new covenant. There's the second covenant. He's then commanded. He then tells them all of the details. You have the details of how to build. They have to construct the Mishkan, etc. And they are also told, of course, all of the details that occur within the Mishkan, right? Okay, because that's all necessary. That all follows through. They build the Mishkan. Vayikra begins with the laws of the offering, so that's what you do inside the Mishkan, right? And then only then do you get to once you've gone through all of that, and there are links between all of the rest of Sefer Vayikra, he says like this. Look at the second paragraph. After the break in the text, right? 4 lines down. The Kasha Hishtem, when that's completed, Omar Lahem, he said to them, Oid Sivosi Hashem Har Sinai. Hashem also told me, Lifrosh Lahem Hashmita Vayovel. Tell you all about the Shemitah and the Yovel year, the Shemitah and the Jubilee year, and to make this new covenant. Okay. And then he says there was no need to do the sprinkling of the blood again, but they had the renewal through the warnings and the admonition that occurs in this place, in this at this point in time. Okay, so this is very important, Rambam, very important comment by Nachmanides. It helps us explain, he's encompassed here a huge chunk of the Torah, links it up in a way that perhaps we hadn't thought of before, right? That we have here 2 covenants. We have the covenant at the beginning that is made with the first set of tablets, which is spelt out at the end of Parshat Mishpatim, where there's a sprinkling of the blood on the people, etc., etc. And elements are mentioned there, like the Shemitah. Here, however, they lose that in a sense because of the breaking of the tablets and the golden calf, etc. And there's a need for a new covenant. Once they've been told how to build the Mishkan, what happens in the Mishkan, etc., the renewal of the covenant is spelt out in detail through this parsha. And again, you see the same thing. It is the link between the land and the covenant. They are so closely bound up together. So now that we've understood this, let's now understand what exactly the rationale of this mitzvah is. So we've understood that it's very important. Okay? We've understood that it's critical to this covenant with the Jewish people. Hashem's covenant with us as a nation. Okay? So the question is, how is it that Shemitah can fulfill that? What is the purpose of it? The Kli Yakar tells us, it was the Rav of Prague, died in 1619, I think. He says like this, source 5. B'tam mitzvah zu, first line, yesh deus chalukas, there are different views. He says, Ki rabim omrim shatamu shetishbo sa'oretz kadesha tosif teis kochal Israel. Many say that the reason for this mitzvah is to give the land a break. Let the land lie fallow. It's completely practical so that it can recover, and you shouldn't overuse the land. And he says, the Rambam in Moreh Nevuchim, in Guide for the Perplexed, he calls him the Rav HaMoreh, the one who teaches, because Moreh Nevuchim, the Guide to the Perplexed, right? This is the view of the Rambam, and the Abarbanel argues with him. And the problem with this view, he says, and he brings the Abarbanel who disagrees with the Rambam, is that if the Torah was worried that the land shouldn't become weak, why would there be exile through not fulfilling this? The punishment should be that the land should not produce the fruit of the land. That should be the punishment, right? Why is it that they're exiled? And also he says this is not a Shabbos Lashem. It's not a Sabbath for Hashem. It's just for the purpose of the land. It's the practical needs of the land. And he says, what is the benefit? It says the land will appease its Sabbaths. How will the land benefit from exiling the Jewish people and then the non-Jewish nations coming into the land who constantly work it? How will the land rest? Do you understand? You understand the problem? In the admonition it says, the Torah says, well, because you didn't keep Shemitah, you'll be exiled from the land, and then what? Other people are going to come in, and what are they going to do? They're not going to let the land rest. They're going to let the land work and work even harder. He says it doesn't make sense. That's his problem with it. The Akedah, he was also one of the classic early commentaries, he gives another reason. He says, you know what the purpose of this mitzvah is? He says, the reason is because we should remember that there's always a renewal of the world. To remember that the world itself, how it came into being, and the cycles of the world, the cycle of the world's existence, etc., understand about creation. And he says the Abarbanel agrees with this as well. And he says, I don't understand how that makes sense either. Because that's what Shabbat is about. Why would you need another mitzvah, right? If that you're doing every week. Every week you keep Shabbat to remember about creation. You stop working so that you remember that Hashem created the world. So what is the point of doing that? Right? On the 7th year, on the land, the whole land. He doesn't like that reason either. Okay? So therefore he gives another explanation. He says, now look at this next paragraph. It begins with the word of Kedei, 3rd paragraph down. Ukedei leyashev, he says, in order to resolve kama dikdukim b'lashon parsha, to resolve a number of different points in the parsha, Oma ani, I say as follows. Sheta mitzvah zu, hi lahashrish es Yisrael, b'midas ha'emunah v'bitochen v'Hashem. You want to understand what the purpose of this mitzvah is? It is to entrench in the hearts and minds of the Jewish people the sense of trust and faith in Hashem. Ki choshash HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Hashem was concerned. Pen b'voy omel ha'aretz, when they come into the land, is asku ba'avodas ha'adoma al minak ha'tivi. They will immediately begin working the land in a natural way, as farmers do, as people and human beings act. Right? V'ka'asher kabir motzo yodom. It's a quotation, a paraphrase of a verse in the book of Job and Eov. When they get, their hand becomes strong, yishkechu es Hashem, they'll forget Hashem. V'yasiru b'tchono mimenu, when they will remove their trust from Him. V'yachshvu, when they will think, yikrichom v'otzem yodom osarhem asachai lazeh, that everything they've achieved is only from the strength of their hand. V'olam kumin hogo noeg, and yeah, it's true, we had this ancient story where they would tell us there were miracles. That's all ancient history. But now, it's all about the world just goes. It just runs as normal. They just, their land, they run the land themselves, and that's it. And there's nothing else to think about. Al Kain, therefore, Hashem Hashem completely removed them from the natural order of things. The natural way of the world is in 6 years, you sow the land for 2 years, and the 3rd land it lies fallow. And Hashem said, what? 6 years sow your land. 6 years work the land. Right? And I promise you, Hashem says, that it will continue producing fruit for you. And then there's another miracle within a miracle. Because after you've sown it for 6 years, he says, it will, in the 6th year, at least, right? It's not going to be, it's the end of the cycle. The 6th year, you think you get the weakest crops. And what does Hashem tell us? Yes, let's look at it inside. Let's look at it inside. Chapter 25, verse 21. What is the promise? It's one of the most remarkable verses in the whole Torah. Chapter 25, verse 21. Yeah? The tzivisi, esber chilsi, lochem, v'shana hashishis. I command my blessing to you in the 6th year. V'asos es hatzvua l'shlosh hashonim. And the land will produce produce which lasts for 3 years. And you need to understand the magnificence of this verse. Because if you play devil's advocate, think about it for a second. And those who would, God forbid, suggest that a human being wrote the Torah, you'd never put that in. You would never ever put that in. Do you understand what that means? You're saying, test me, Hashem says. I will command my blessing and you will get 3 years crops.
So Hashem's actually saying, I know whether you're going to keep Shemitah or not.
Yeah. But again, if you have to think, as I was saying, playing devil's advocate, this is one of the strongest quote-unquote proofs of the divine origin of the Torah, because no human being would set themselves up for failure. It's the obvious, you'd be able to disprove it. If we don't get crops that last for 3 years, it shows that what was the promise? But Hashem gives an absolute promise. So it's based on the miraculous. What was that?
Why do the farmers then need help? Why do we have to support them?
Why do we have to support them? Okay, that's not necessarily a question. As far as I remember that they actually had the they do say that there was significant evidence still of the divine support in previous that had existed in the year before the Shemitah year. Why do farmers still need support? It doesn't mean that they don't need help from the rest of the people as well. Okay, all right.
Maybe we're not at the right level yet. Maybe.
We get to be part of the mitzvah. That's the problem.
Yes, and I'm asking a technical question on the Torah itself.
It's a fair question.
The Torah says,
it's a fair
Hashem
question.
says, I will support you if you keep Shemitah.
Yeah, okay. It could be.
So it could be the other way around.
Do you understand it in the sense of whether does it work on the individual farmer's level? Does it work on the level of the whole land keeping Shemitah? Sadly, it's not the case that everyone keeps. So I'm sure that is discussed and spoken about. But the fact is, it's a remarkable blessing. It's a remarkable promise that is in the Torah itself. And then he says, look on the next page, the last piece of the Kli Yakar. He says, according to this, Dinu, he says, it's understandable. It's understandable that they should be liable to exile as a result of the sin of the Shemitah. It's not just the fact that they don't keep Shemitah, it's what it represents. The neglect of the Shemitah represents a lack of faith and trust in Hashem, right? Because that's the whole essence of the mitzvah. They didn't trust in Hashem and rely on His salvation. They didn't rely on the fact that Hashem would produce this miracle for 3 years. As it says, he says, in a remarkable and beautiful verse in the book of Jeremiah, spread out wander through the streets of Jerusalem, the courtyards of Jerusalem, and know and see, find a person who seeks faith, and I will forgive it. What an incredible verse. This idea of the need to work on emunah, what it means to have faith. The land itself will be particular about this. And that's what it means when it's phrased in the admonition that the land will appease its Sabbaths. Because the land is so inextricably bound up in this, the holiness of the land of Israel, to strengthen the faith in Hashem. Through that we understand that we're like sharecroppers, people are employed to work in the land, but Hashem is the ultimate owner of the land. The land itself wants Hashem, so to speak, to be the owner of the land in that way. And therefore that is critical, that's what it means. And what we see from here is that the mitzvah of Shemitah is a guide to what our relationship with the land of Israel needs to be. Our relationship with Israel needs to be one of deep, deep emunah, deep faith. And that should give us tremendous chizuk. That should strengthen us in these days, the time that we're living in. Because yes, if we look at ourselves and the fragile, sometimes the seemingly fragile existence that we have in the land of Israel, sometimes we can become despondent. We think, where's the end? What's going to be? How are we going to get through this and everything else? So we need to remind ourselves of this. We need to remind ourselves that is not our relationship with the land. Our relationship with the land is not determined by any political arguments or points in time. It's defined by a deep sense of belief and emunah and trust in Hashem. And that is the relationship that all of our ancestors had with the land of Israel. And the challenge for us today is they had that when they couldn't get there, when they couldn't see it and they couldn't believe it and they couldn't hold it. The stories of Jews who would somehow manage to get to the land of Israel after years of trying, and they would go and kiss the stones of the ground. The Gemara talks about this. They would kiss the stones of the land. And that's because when you don't have something, you understand its holiness. You understand how precious it is. And when you have something or you have access to something and you can get on a plane and go there, you can risk forgetting what that relationship means. And that's why we have to learn parashiyot like this. That's why we have to learn it. We have to remind ourselves. We have to renew that within ourselves, the strength of feeling that we need to build and develop, the connection, the love for the land that we need to have, and realize that it doesn't depend on anything other than that sense of emunah and that sense of faith. And therefore, according to all of this, we can understand why that is the second covenant, right? The covenant that is made with the Jewish people on the basis of the second set of tablets is bound up with the relationship with the land itself. Because they're about to enter the land. And Hashem says to them, make sure you make that a productive relationship. Make sure you allow it to strengthen your faith and belief. and don't let it distract you. Don't let it take you away. Don't fall into the trap of thinking that of losing that sense of connection and that sense of belief in the Torah and Hashem Himself. And I'm going to show you as the final piece for this shir what I think is a beautiful way we can build on this and develop it just to the next level. You know, the difference between the first set and the second set of tablets is what? What is the difference? One critical difference.
The first set had all the oral law.
Yeah, there's the physical difference, but there's also the fact that where did the first set come from?
Hashem.
Hashem Himself, and the second set. That's right. Moshe Rabbeinu is told that there is a reserve of sapphire stone within his tent, so to speak. He is the one who has to hew out the tablets himself, right? And that's what it says. The Torah says, "Pasol lecha." You have to hew them out for yourself. So what we have is, with the second set of tablets, and remember now we're saying that this covenant that belongs with it, that's how the Ramban understands it, yeah? It's very much an emphasis on the Jewish people being told, you need to work at this. This will not be given for you. This is not something that's just going to descend. You're going to have to work on it. You're going to have to try and acquire it. Now, Tzvi Hirsch-Ferber, in a beautiful piece that he has on this parsha, he builds a very, very interesting distinction between the Shemitah year and the Yovel year, the 50th year, right? You know who Tzvi Hirsch-Ferber was? He died in 1966. He was known as the Rav of Soho, because he was the Rav of the West End Talmud Torah Synagogue in Soho. He was a remarkable, charismatic Rav. I think for 42 years he was the Rav there. He managed to bring together very much sort of working class, sort of immigrants and whatever, and built up a whole Jewish community there. Rav Tzvi Hirsch-Ferber, who was a incredibly productive writer, wrote many different commentaries. He has an idea as follows. He says, look carefully at the difference between Shemitah and the Yovel year. Let's see. So Shemitah we've just seen. Shemitah says, V'shav sa'aretz, the land shall rest, Shabbos Lashem. Okay? What is the Yovel year? What is the Yovel year? Let's look at chapter 25, verse 5. It says, you shall count 7 weeks. Yeah, 7 times 7. So 7 weeks, 7 years, 7 sets of 7 years. And you get to 49 years. 49 years. Then what? You blow the shofar in the 7th month. In the Yovel year, they would blow the shofar on Yom Kippur that year, 10th of the month. You shall blow the shofar in your land, and you shall sanctify the 50th year, Okrasem, Durar, and freedom is proclaimed. Because what happens in the Yovel year, the Jubilee year, the land goes back to its owners, and the slaves go free, and that is what happens, right? That phrase that really characterizes the and defines the Yovel year. That's how it is. Well, I just want to find the one that I'm looking for. So it says, 1 second. Yeah, that's right. Which the one that's inscribed on the Liberty Bell in Philadelphia, which I think is Chof Daled, verse 24 of all the land of your inheritance, you shall proclaim freedom throughout the land. Right, that's on the Liberty Bell in Philadelphia. Right, the inspiration that the Torah is given to many other stories as well. So look at Rav Tzvi Hirsch-Ferber. Look what he says. He says, this is our last source on the sheet, number 6. He says, Rashi says, what does it mean, L'Shem Hashem? Rashi, L'Shem Hashem, sorry, it's a bit faint. Kashem Shenema b'Shabbos Bereshit. I'm at the beginning of the second line down, right, the last source. As it says on Shabbat Bereshit, that means the Shabbos of creation. It says, the sake of Hashem. F Shalom, he says, we could say as follows, Ki matzinu kedushas Shabbos chaluka me kedushas Yom Tov. There's a difference between Shabbat and Yom Tov. The Shabbos kvi ovakaimov, ein tzorach kiddush based in. When it comes to Shabbat, right, it doesn't matter what we do. We don't have to do anything to sanctify Shabbat. Of course we make Kiddush, but Shabbat comes along whether we like it or not. You understand? It's fixed. Based in ancient times, did not sanctify the Shabbat formally, right? It happens. You get to Shabbat, it's Shabbos. Mashenk in Yom Tov, we know that Yisrael Makadshe, the Tzoli Bevestin. When it comes to the Yom Tovim, how do we know it's Yom Tov? Only because of the sighting of the moon, and therefore the Beth Din would sanctify the month, and then you know when Yom Tov is. Now we have a fixed calendar. But in ancient times, it does not work like that. That's why all our blessings that we say, all the brachot that we say on Yom Tov are always Mekadesh, Yisrael, V'hazmanim, right? who sanctifies the Jewish people and the times of the year. That extra word Yisrael is there because without us doing our part, they don't become sanctified because you don't even know when they are. You understand? We don't know when the days of the month are unless the Jewish people are involved. Whereas Shabbat, we don't say Mekadesh Yisrael v'Hashabbat. We just say Mekadesh HaShabbos because Hashem does it, right? Question?
Yeah, I mean, it seems like it's at the wrong place in the Torah. They're giving the laws of Shemitah whilst they're traveling in the desert. It's not even before Devarim where the spies go in. So it's like preparing to go in there. There's nowhere near there.
It's a good question. Good question. You have to remember that the whole time scale is only thrown off course because of those spies. So actually, they would have been very close to it. There was a very short journey to go to the land, right? Everything went over very, very quickly, right? But Midbar Nosson, Shalach Lecha is already when they send the spies and they're about ready to go in. But because the spies, the false report, they wander for 40 years, so the whole thing changes. So actually, the time frame is much closer than you think. It's a good point, but that's the answer, okay? They're much closer than they think. Now, he says like this, just like you have Shabbat and Yom Tov, Kain Chalukah Kedushas Shvius Mekdushas Yovel. He says that's the difference. The same thing. It's a beautiful idea between Shemitah and Yovel. The Kol Mashanoi B'Shvius no B'Yovel. The same restrictions that apply to Shemitah apply to Yovel. When you have the Yovel year, is the 50th year after a Shemitah year, so it's a bumper year. You have two Shemitahs, one after the other. 2 years where the land is still lie fallow. But with Yovel it says, Rak Yovel Kosobo V'Kidashtem. You shall sanctify. Sha'atem makadshim oso. That you shall sanctify it. Ki yoveli kodesh yelachem. It shall be holy to you. Just like it says with the Yomim Tovim, mikro kodesh yeh. That pasuk, verse 10, pasuk Yud, it says v'kidashtem. You shall sanctify. And how do you sanctify it? How do you sanctify it? By blowing the shofar. V'ha'avartem, it says, right? Ta'aviru shofar. V'ha'avarta shofar. You have to blow the shofar to sanctify it, right? It doesn't become Yovel unless they blow the shofar. Whereas Shemitah, it is Kodesh and sanctified of its own accord. And therefore that's how it is. And that is the difference between Shemitah and Yovel. So it's possible that here we have and this is the final piece of this, which is that we have this parallel and difference between the Shemitah and the Yovel. Shemitah rolls along of its own accord. Every 7th year, like you have Shabbat, the cycles of 7, right? We count 7 weeks until we get to Mount Sinai. That's what we're doing now. We're counting the Omer, right? We have 6 days, and the 7th day we get to Shabbat, right? 7 years, and you get to Shemitah. That's all fixed. That's holy system which is fixed. But there is, within that system, the command to inject our own sense of renewal, our own sense of sanctity, the Kidashtem, and you shall sanctify, and put our own efforts into it. And that is something which is a critical message as well. The Jewish people enter the land of Israel, right? Enter the land of Israel. And they are commanded to appreciate that their existence in the land is dependent on an appreciation of what it means to believe, to develop and build their emunah. What will help them to build their faith is their observance of the Shemitah, because then they understand their relationship with the land. But come 50th year, they are reminded every major cycle of 7 cycles, right? They're reminded this is, you need to put effort into this. The Kidashtem, you need to sanctify this. I mentioned on Monday evening, the word Yovel, the Ramban tells us, is like means to move. Like in Israel, they have a Chevrat Hovala, is a moving company, right? Because that's what the Yovel is. Everyone moves. It's designed to move us. Make sure you make a difference. Don't just rely on everything happening for you, happening for us. We have to build it ourselves. And therefore, what we have here, I think, and this is the title of this whole shir, the idea of majesty and meaning, the eternal gift of the land of Israel. That is what we have to cement within ourselves, right? We live within a world which is so confusing and it's so difficult sometimes to understand, and we have our own questions and our own dilemmas and our own difficulties or whatever. But one of the key ways in which we remain strong, it doesn't answer the questions and the challenges and knowing what will be and if and how and who's right and wrong and what should we... None of us are making those decisions. What we are doing and what we can do is remind ourselves of the depth of our relationship with our land, right? And that is at the heart of this parasha. Okay? Okay, very briefly, let's take two questions. I don't want to keep people later. I'll come back.
I was going to say, isn't that the reason that we blow a shofar Motzi Yom Kippur in every year?
Yes, I believe so.
In
Yeah,
case-
of the
in case
Yovel.
it was the Yovel
Could be, yeah, there is a
year,
relationship with the
lost
Yovel year. The idea, I think so.
We've
Because
lost
they
it
would blow it. Yeah, that's right. It was a very long governing, the Shemitah, the Yovel year in Kippur, because they would also, I think, do all of the Rosh Hashanah brachot of like the Malchus on Yom Kippur as well. I think so. Yes, sorry.
Sorry,
People lasted
excuse
2
my
days.
ignorance, but does the state of Israel follow the laws of Shemitah?
That's a good question and a very involved question. There are many farmers who do in different, who do that. I think that the last Shemitah year, they said there was more than 50% of Jewish-owned land in Israel that was observant of Shemitah, which is quite a remarkable statistic. There are other things that are the chief rabbinate has a system whereby they sell the land. There are those who do that as well. Who don't, they sell the land to non-Jews. So there's a whole complicated system around that as well. But again, the relationship of the state of Israel with Jewish law is a really important subject. It's a very interesting one. It's something called Mishpat Ivri, and how and where that kind of informs and is related to the state of Israel itself. It is a huge share in and of itself. But one thing's for sure, and that is a huge proportion and number of inhabitants of the land of Israel deeply understand the biblical roots and the connection to the land of Israel, whether they're observant or not. And that is 100% true. Right from the very beginning, I think, of the state, many people have actually understood that, and we need to remind ourselves of that. Okay? That's how it is.